She was 18 and had just been thrown out. No plan, no savings, nothing but a duffel bag and $10 she had been keeping in a coffee can since Christmas. And with that $10, she bought a rusted lightship laid up in a creek on the sound side of eastern North Carolina. 135 feet of steel that had not moved under her own power since 1968. The main deck had holes you could put a foot through. The bilge pumps had been dead for 30 years. The county called her an abandoned vessel. The state had opened a file on having her cut up and hauled off as scrap. But what nobody knew was that inside the lamp locker of that old lightship, behind a steel door padlocked shut since 1962, was something. Something that would change her life forever. Before we continue, if stories like this mean something to you, hit subscribe. And tell us in the comments where you're watching from. We love seeing how far these stories travel. Tessa Gaskill was born in Beaufort, North Carolina, and her family has been on that stretch of coast for 6 generations that anybody can document, and probably longer. Her father worked on a dredge and then did not work. Her mother cleaned rental houses on Emerald Isle in the season and worked at a Food Lion out of it. There were 4 children, and Tessa was the second. The house was a 2-bedroom on a lane behind a boatyard. It was crowded in a way everybody in that family had stopped mentioning. What happened in February is that her father's brother and his 2 children moved in, and there were 9 people in that house, and Tessa was 18 and out of school and working. Her mother did not put it as being thrown out, she put it as needing the room. Tessa has been careful about the wording and has not once spoken against her mother. Her version is that there were 9 people and 2 bedrooms, and she was the one with a job. She had worked at a fish house in Beaufort since she was 16. Picking line, then the scales. She makes $16 an hour. She slept in the back of a coworker's boat for 9 nights, on a bunk in a cuddy cabin in a slip, and washed at the marina head. The lightship came up because of a man at the fish house who runs a crab boat and knows every derelict in every creek from Cedar Island to Oriental. He mentioned an old lightship up a creek off the Nyus that the state was going to have cut up. The man who owned her had died. His estate wanted her gone and would take anything. Anything turned out to be $10 and the transfer fee. Tessa went and looked at her on a Sunday in March. She got a ride to the head of the creek and walked out along a bank for half a mile through wax myrtle and marsh. Then the trees opened, and there she was, 135 feet of red steel, sitting on the mud on an even keel with about 4 feet of water under her at high tide. 2 masts. A wheelhouse. And on the side of the hull, in letters 8 feet tall, painted over twice and coming through both coats, 1 word. Diamond, a lightship is a lighthouse that floats, and the reason they existed is worth 2 minutes because almost nobody now knows. There are places on a coast where a ship must be warned off, and you cannot build a lighthouse. Sand, that shifts. Water too deep to found a tower in. A shoal 11 miles offshore with nothing to stand on. So the answer, from the 1820s onward, was to take a vessel, anchor her on that exact spot, put a light at the top of her mast, and leave her there. She does not go anywhere. That is the entire job. A lightship is a ship whose only purpose is to stay put in the worst place on the coast. The United States operated 179 of them. The last one came off station in 1985, and after that it was all automated buoys. Diamond Shoals is off Cape Hatteras, and it is the reason that coast is called the graveyard of the Atlantic. It is a bank of shifting sand running about 12 miles out to sea, right where the Labrador Current coming south meets the Gulf Stream coming north. 2,000 ships are on the bottom out there. You cannot build on it. So from 1824 there was a lightship, and there was one at that station, on and off, for 143 years. The vessel Tessa Gaskill bought for $10 is not the famous one, and she is at pains about it. The Diamond Shoals station had 8 lightships over its life. One was torpedoed by a German submarine in 1918 while she was radioing warnings to other ships. People know that story. Hers is a later one. She was built in 1930 at a yard in Charleston. She was on that station from 1931 to 1962 with breaks for refit. She came off when the station went to a fixed offshore tower. After that, she was a relief vessel out of Portsmouth for 6 years, and then she was laid up in 1968, and then she was sold, and then she was sold again, and then she was sold to a man who intended to make her a restaurant and did not. He put her up that creek in 1979, and she has been sitting in the mud there for 46 years. Her hull is riveted steel 3/4 of an inch thick at the waterline. That is why she is still there. A lightship was built to sit at anchor in a hurricane and take whatever came. They were the strongest small vessels the government ever put in the water. She got aboard for the first time on a plank off the bank at low tide, and she went through the whole vessel in about 2 hours. The wheelhouse is stripped. The engine room is flooded to the floor plates and always will be. The crew berthing forward has 11 bunks in it, and they are all still there, steel frames with the springs rusted through. The galley has a coal range bolted to the deck and a table with a raised lip round the edge. You only understand that once somebody explains it. This vessel spent 30 years rolling at anchor, and everything on a table would otherwise be on the floor. That is the detail Tessa has repeated most. A lightship is anchored, so she does not steer into a sea. She sits broadside to it and she rolls constantly, for weeks. There is a locker on the port side of the lamproom at the base of the mast. Steel door, about 4 feet by 3, hinged with a hasp. It is the only locked thing on that entire vessel. Everything else had been opened, stripped, stolen from, or left swinging for 46 years. That one door had a brass padlock on it, seized solid, and the key was not anywhere aboard. She cut it off in April with a hacksaw blade and about 90 minutes. Behind the door, the locker is dry. That is the first thing, and it is a small miracle on a vessel with holes in her main deck, and it is because the lamproom is the highest enclosed space in the ship, and the mast collar above it was still sound. There are 2 shelves. On the top shelf is what a lamp locker is for. Spare mantles in cardboard tubes. A tin of wicks. 2 glass chimneys wrapped in newspaper from 1958. A quart can of lamp oil, still sealed. A brass lens cleaning kit in a fitted wooden case. On the bottom shelf there are 9 wooden ships. They are hulls, carved from single blocks, between about 9 and 14 inches long. No rigging and no masts. Just the hull shape, sanded smooth and oiled, each one a different vessel. A trawler with a raked stem. A tug. A small freighter with a long foredeck. A schooner hull. A shrimp boat. Tessa Gaskill picked one up and turned it over, and on the flat of the keel, cut into the wood with a knife point, there was a name and a date. 8 of the 9 have a name and a date. The 9th has a date and no name. Tessa wrote them out on the back of a fuel receipt sitting on the deck plates. The earliest date is November 1933. The latest is the 9th of March 1962. She did not know what they were for 2 days. What she did know is that carving was what lightship crews did, and everybody on that coast knows that. Because the boredom on a lightship was legendary, and it is in every account anybody has ever written about the service. You are anchored on a shoal. You cannot go anywhere. There are 11 to 15 men aboard on a rotation of weeks on and weeks off. Once the lamp is lit and the log is filled in, there is nothing to do but watch the sea and wait to be relieved. So they carved. Scrimshaw. Ship models, half-hulls, whole fleets. Lightship models are a recognized category of American folk art, with collectors and prices. Which is what Tessa assumed she had. 9 folk art hulls in a locker made by a bored sailor. Then she went to the library in Beaufort and looked up the first name on the first keel. The name on the November 1933 hull is a Menhaden steamer that went down on Diamond Shoals in a northeast gale with the loss of 6 men. The name on the second is a coastal freighter, February 1936, lost with all hands. The third is a trawler out of Beaufort, 1941. The fourth is a Liberty ship that broke her back on the outer bar in 1944, and it is one of the wrecks divers go to now. Every one of the 8 named hulls is a vessel that was lost on Diamond Shoals while the Lightship was on station. He was not carving the ships that went past. He was carving the ones that did not make it. Tessa Gaskill has one line about that moment she has not been able to improve on. She had been holding a shelf of shipwrecks and had thought it was a hobby. 9 hulls. 31 years. On a vessel whose entire purpose was to stop exactly that from happening. The man who made them is not a mystery, because the Coast Guard kept crew lists and because there is only one name that appears on that vessel's rolls across the whole span of the dates. Elias Midget served aboard her from 1931 until she came off station in 1962. 31 years. Midget is a name that means something specific on the Outer Banks. The Midgets of Chicamacomico produced more decorated surfmen than any family in the history of the United States Life-Saving Service, and 7 of them hold the Gold Life-Saving Medal. Elias Midget was born on Hatteras Island in 1904 and went into the lighthouse service at 19 and into the Coast Guard when it absorbed the service in 1939. He was a lamplighter and then a mate. His job for 31 years was the light. He never married. He lived on Hatteras between watches and he died in 1981 at 77. There are 2 photographs of him in the archive at the graveyard of the Atlantic Museum. In both of them he is in a group and in both of them he is not looking at the camera. Ola Fulcher is 79 years old and lives in Atlantic, North Carolina. And she has been trying to identify one shipwreck since 1974. Her father was a Coast Guardsman at Ocracoke, and he was on the search in March 1962. Tessa found her through the museum, because the museum has a file on that loss, and Ola Fulcher's name is on 19 items in it. On the 9th of March 1962, in a northeast blow, something went down on the outer edge of Diamond Shoals. The Lightship logged debris in the water at first light and reported it. What came ashore over the following week was a hatch cover, part of a wooden pilothouse door, 2 life rings with no lettering, and a quantity of yellow pine dunnage. No survivors, no bodies, no name, no distress call anybody recorded, and no vessel ever reported overdue that matched. 63 years later it is still an unidentified loss, and Ola Fulcher has a filing cabinet in a back bedroom devoted to it. Tessa Gaskill drove to Atlantic in May with the 9th hull in a shoebox on the passenger's seat. Ola Fulcher took it out on her kitchen table and held it for a long time before she said anything. Where did this come from? A locker on the Diamond Lightship. Who carved it? A man called Elias Midget. He was the lamplighter. Ola Fulcher put it down and turned it so the keel was up and read the date and did not say anything at all for about a minute. My daddy was out there that week, she said. I know. That's how I found you. She turned the hull back over and ran her thumb along the sheer line from the stem to the transom. This is a Corsound Sharpie, Ola Fulcher said. Look at the rake on that stern. Nobody built these anywhere but here. That is the thing the 9th hull does, and it took a 79-year-old woman 4 seconds to see it. The official record on that 1962 loss lists what came ashore and draws no conclusion about what kind of vessel it was. The hatch cover was not distinctive. The dunnage was not distinctive. But Elias Midget was on that lightship at first light on the 9th of March, and he saw the debris field before anybody else did, and he was a Hatteras man who had been looking at boats his whole life. And then he went below and carved a hull. Not a generic hull. A specific type, with the stern rake in the flat run and the low freeboard of a shallow draft working boat built on that sound. 40 feet at most. The sort of thing that had no business on the outer shoals in a northeast gale in March. He knew what he had watched go down. He did not know her name. So he carved the shape and cut the date and left the name off, and he put her on the shelf with the other 8, and when the ship came off station in 1962, he padlocked the locker. What has happened since is slow, and it is not finished. Ola Fulcher went back to her filing cabinet with a boat type instead of a blank, and that changes what you search. You stop looking at freighter registries and you start looking at local craft. A 40-foot Sharpie out of that sound in March 1962 would have been shrimping or hauling. 2 or 3 men aboard. And if she was working out of a creek with no dockmaster and no radio, nobody files anything when she does not come back. You wait, and then you know. There are 4 candidate vessels so far. All 4 stopped appearing in county records between 1961 and 1963. No sale, no scrapping, no explanation. Ola Fulcher has letters out to 11 families. 2 have written back. Neither is a match yet. She is 79, and her position, on Tessa's kitchen table this time, is that she does not expect to finish it and that finishing it was never the point. The point is that for 63 years the file said unknown vessel, and now it says probable core sound Sharpie, approximately 40 feet, and that is not nothing. Tessa has done one thing with that which Ola Fulcher did not ask for. She had the museum's registrar photograph the 9th hull from 6 angles, and she sent the set to every historical society and watermen's association between Manteo and Wilmington. 11 of them have put it up, 1 in a newsletter, the rest on notice boards. Tessa printed the sets herself at a copy shop in Morehead City. $40. The caption says what the boat is and when she went down, and asks anybody who remembers a vessel of that type missing from that stretch in 1962 to make contact. 2 people have written. Neither had a boat, but both had a story about somebody who did, and Ola Fulcher has both letters in the cabinet now. One of them, from a woman in sea level, says her uncle stopped shrimping in 1962 and would never say why and drank for 30 years afterwards. That is not evidence of anything, and Ola Fulcher has written the woman a careful letter saying so. But she has also driven to sea level twice. Tessa went with her the second time. She has offered almost nothing about that afternoon except that the uncle is dead and the woman is 71, and there is no version of this that gives anybody an answer they can hold. The ship is the problem, and Tessa puts the numbers first because everybody asks. She is sitting on mud in fresh to brackish water, which is actually the reason she is still here. Steel in salt water is on a clock. Steel in a creek off the Nyus is on a much slower one. The main deck needs about 400 square feet of plating cut out and replaced. That is marine welding at marine rates. $91,000 is the number she has from a yard in Wanchese. The bulwarks and the wheelhouse are worse and are not structural. Nobody has any intention of ever making her float again. That is not on the table, and Tessa has never once pretended it was. The question is whether the hull can be kept from opening up where it sits. The realistic version, which came from a retired shipwright in Oriental, is that you keep the water out of the deck and let the rest wait. That is patching, tarring, and a lot of plywood, and it is about $6,000 a year forever. She has $1,400 saved as of November. That is 7 months of everything that is not food and fuel. The maths does not work yet, and she is the first to say it. What she has is a hull that is not getting worse fast, and time, and she is 18. The other thing she has is the fish house, which has been on that waterfront since 1938, and which put a jar on the counter in June without telling her. It had $611 in it by November. Watermen put money in that jar. She has not been able to thank most of them because she does not know who they were. That is how it works on that waterfront, and it always has. Nobody signs anything. The jar is still on the counter. $600 is 1 month of keeping the water out of that deck. Tessa has worked out that if the jar keeps going the way it has, and she keeps putting in what she puts in, She gets to 21 with the vessel still there. Tessa Gaskill is 18 years old and makes $16 an hour on the scales at a fish house. Living aboard is the part people ask about, and it is less romantic than it sounds. She moved on to her in May into the after cabin, which was the master's cabin and is the only compartment on that vessel that is dry, warm-ish, and closable. There is no power. She has 2 solar panels lashed to the boat deck and a marine battery, and that runs a light, a fan, and a phone charger. There is no water. She carries it in from her aunt's in Beaufort 5 gallons at a time, in the back of a co-worker's truck to the head of the creek, and then half a mile out along the bank on foot. There is no head-aboard that works, and there will not be. There is a composting arrangement in a locker, and she is straightforward about it and does not elaborate. The mosquitoes on that creek in July are a thing she was warned about by 4 separate people, and did not properly believe until August. What she has instead is 135 feet of steel that belongs to her, and a door that locks, and nobody who can tell her to make room. The creek is the whole reason this is possible, and Tessa did not know that when she bought her. A lightship laid up in a marina berth costs money every month forever. This one is not in a berth. She is sitting on the bottom, on private mud, up a creek off the Nyus, on a parcel that belonged to the man who put her there, and now belongs to his estate. The estate's position, in writing, is that they do not want the vessel, and they do not want the ground, and they would very much like both to stop being their problem. So Tessa has a 5-year agreement, signed in April, that lets the vessel stay where she is at no cost, in exchange for her taking on the abandoned vessel liability that the state was about to put on the estate. That is the actual transaction. $10 bought the ship. What made it possible was that somebody else was more afraid of her than Tessa was. Learning what she has been the work of the summer, and she has done it the way people in that county do things, which is by asking somebody older. The retired shipwright in Oriental is called Wade Salter, and he is 83, and he apprenticed in a yard that built Sharpies. He came out to the creek in June and spent 5 hours aboard, and Tessa took 11 pages of notes. What he told her about the hulls is the part that matters. A man who carves a boat from a single block and gets the shear line right is not making an ornament. You cannot get the shear right unless you have looked at that hull in the water. He also had the tool marks, consistent across all 9, and the wood is juniper on 8 of them, and white cedar on the 9th, and that juniper is what everybody on that coast carves, because it does not check. Wade Salter has been out 3 more times since June. He is 83, and he drives himself. What he wants, and he has been direct about it, is for somebody to write down how a Sharpie was built on that sound before the last 4 men who know it are gone. He has offered Tessa the whole of it if she will take notes. She has taken notes. 11 pages became 40 by September. He has also told her the thing about Elias Midget that nobody in the museum had. He knew him. Not well. Wade Salter was a boy in a yard at Wanchese, and Elias Midget was a man who came in for lumber twice a year, and what he remembers is that he bought juniper offcuts and would not say what for. Everybody figured he was making duck decoys. Wade Salter said. Half that coast made decoys. If you're enjoying this story, take a second and subscribe. It helps us keep making stories like this one. And tell us in the comments, is there something in your family that got kept for a reason nobody explained? The 9th, being a different wood, is the sort of thing that a woman with a filing cabinet noticed immediately and nobody else did. Wade Salter was the one who put a name to the wood. Ola Fulcher was the one who understood what a different wood meant. Ola Fulcher's reading of it is that in March 1962, he did not have juniper aboard, or did not have a piece big enough, and he did not wait. The other 9 hulls span 29 years. That one was carved in a hurry. There is one more detail in the wood, and the registrar found it under a lamp in October. On the 8 juniper hulls, the date is cut with the same knife point and the same depth, and the strokes are clean. On the white cedar one, the strokes are ragged and go over themselves. White cedar is softer than juniper and takes a cut more easily, not less. Which means the hand was not steady. That is as far as anybody is willing to go with it. Wade Salter will go as far as ragged. No further. Ola Fulcher will go further, and she has earned the right to. Her position is that a man who has watched 3 or 4 people drown 11 miles away at 6 in the morning and can do nothing about it does not cut a clean line that afternoon. What the museum has been able to add is the log. The Diamond Shoals Lightship logs for that period are held at the National Archives in College Park, and a researcher pulled the March 1962 volume for them in July. The 9th of March entry is in a different hand from the rest of that week, which is normal because the log is written by whoever has the watch. It records the weather, the sea state, and debris observed in the water at 0640. Position given as bearing and distance from the vessel, reported by radio at 0655. There is no name in it because there was no name to put. And then the log carries on. Weather 3 times a day, lamp lit at sunset, lamp out at sunrise for another 9 months until she came off station in December. That is the thing that has stayed with Tessa more than the hulls. Not that he carved them. That he carved them and then went back on watch. The offers came in June, and they were serious, because Lightship folk art is a real market, and 9 documented hulls by a named crewman with a 31-year service record is not a common lot. A dealer in Mystic, Connecticut offered $31,000 for the 9. He was decent about it. He did not pretend it was less than it was. A collector in Maine then offered $40,000. $40,000 is 6 years of keeping the water out of that deck. Tessa turned both down inside a week and has had to explain it more times than she can count. Her answer is that the hulls are the only reason anybody knows what Elias Midget was doing up there for 31 years, and that the moment they are in a case in Connecticut, they are 9 carvings by an unknown maker. The graveyard of the Atlantic Museum at Hatteras has offered to display all 9 on long-term loan, with the 9th one labeled properly and Ola Fulcher's research alongside it. That is what is happening. They go on loan in the spring, and they stay hers, and it costs nobody anything. The loan agreement runs 5 years and renews. The museum is paying for the cases and the mounts and the interpretive panel. What Tessa asked for in exchange is 1 line on that panel, and the museum agreed to it without argument. It names Elias Midget as the maker. No museum panel anywhere has carried his name before. He is in 2 group photographs and a crew list, and that is the whole of it. And here is the last thing, which nobody noticed until the museum's registrar was numbering the 9 for the loan agreement in October. 8 of the hulls are finished. Sanded to about 400 grit, oiled, the keel line crisp. The 9th one is not sanded on the bottom. The keel and the last 2 inches of the run still carry the knife. He put the date on it and stopped. Wade Salter's reading, which Ola Fulcher agrees with and which the registrar wrote into the accession notes, is that the sanding is the last thing you do and it is the part that takes the longest. On the other 8 he finished the job. On that one he cut the date, and then there was nothing left to write on it, and he put it on the shelf like that. 9 months later the ship came off Diamond Shoals for the last time, and he closed a steel door and put a brass padlock through the hasp and turned the key. He served 19 more years in the Coast Guard. He died on Hatteras in 1981. He never told anybody what was in that locker, and no member of his family has ever heard of it. 63 years later, an 18-year-old with a hacksaw blade and nowhere to live cut the lock off in 90 minutes. On a Sunday at the end of November, Tessa Gaskill came off a shift at the fish house at 4 in the afternoon and walked out along the bank in the dark with a 5-gallon jug. The creek at that hour in November is silent except for the water going out. She got aboard on the plank and up to the after cabin and lit the lamp. The lamp is a brass kerosene lamp from the top shelf of the locker, and the quart can of oil that was sealed in 1958 turned out to be perfectly good. It is the only thing on that vessel doing the job it was built for. Here's the part that is not about a lightship. Elias Midget spent 31 years anchored on the worst piece of water on the American coast, doing a job whose entire purpose was to stop ships from dying there. 9 of them died anyway. He could not save them, and he could not raise them, and he could not, in 8 cases out of 9, do one useful thing about any of it. So he took a knife and a block of juniper, and he made each one a shape. And he cut in her name and the day she went, and he put her on a shelf in a locker and shut the door. Nobody asked him to. Nobody knew. 19 more years in the service, and he never said a word. That is what people do with the ones they could not help. They keep some small private account of it, and they do not tell you, and they take it with them. There is somebody in your life doing that right now. Not a hobby, not a collection, a record of the ones that got away from them, kept where nobody will look. So ask, not what they are proud of. Ask what they still think about, while there is still somebody to ask, because Elias Midget died in 1981, and it took 44 years, and a girl with nowhere to sleep to open that door. If this story moved you, subscribe to the channel and share it with someone who needs to hear it. And tell us in the comments, is there something you have kept about a person you could not help? We'd love to hear your story. See you in the next one.